Hello everyone, it's Jen from Old Tinker Studio, and today we were just going to talk about the 12 principles of animation. The 12 principles of animation were established by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston in their book The Illusion of Life. They are both Disney animators and members of the group of animators known as the Nine Old Men. The processes for animation began to take on their own terminology. Over the years, these processes became ingrained in animation and ultimately became the fundamental principles of animation. These principles were for 2D animation, but most of them can also be used in 3D animation. The first principle is squash and stretch. Quote, when a fixed shape is moved about on paper from one drawing to the next, there is a marked rigidity that is emphasized by the movement. In real life, this occurs only with the most rigid shapes. Anything composed of living flesh, no matter how bony, will show considerable movement within its shape and progressing through an action. The squashed position can depict the form either flattened out by great pressure or bunched up and pushed together. A stretched position always shows the same form in a very extended condition. End quote. We can easily see this in the classic Looney Tunes cartoons. In this example, we see the squash and stretch principle in action. We see how the animator stretched Wile E. Coyote as he's being pulled upward toward the cliff. We then see the squash of Wile E. Coyote's head when he hits the bow. The second principle is anticipation. Quote, people in the audience watching an animated scene will not be able to understand the events on the screen unless there is a planned sequence of action that leads them clearly from one activity to the next. They must be prepared for the next movement and expect it before it actually occurs. This is achieved by preceding each major action with a specific move that anticipates for the audience what is about to happen. End quote. Anticipation is something that we see in everyday life, but we are often unaware of it. In this classic Looney Tunes cartoon, based on the turtle and the hare, we see Bugs Bunny winding up before he takes off running. This wind up is the anticipation, which gives the viewers the knowledge that he is about to run off at a high rate of speed. The third principle is staging. Quote, staging is the most general of the principles because it covers so many areas and goes back so far in the theater. Its meaning, however, is very precise. It is the presentation of any idea so that it is completely and unmistakably clear. An action is staged so that it is understood, a personality so that it is recognizable, an expression so that it can be seen, a mood so that it will affect the audience. Each is communicating to the fullest extent with the viewers, which is properly staged. End quote. In the scene from Pixar's Toy Story, we see that Buzz and Woody are centered in the frame, and the other characters are around the periphery. The entire scene is cropped to force the viewer's eye toward Buzz and Woody. The fourth principle is straight-ahead action and pose-to-pose. Quote, there are two main approaches to animation. The first is known as straight-ahead action because the animator literally works straight ahead from his first drawing in the scene. He simply takes off doing one drawing after the other, getting new ideas as he goes along until he reaches the end of the scene. End quote. In this example of a walk cycle, the animator would draw all 8 poses. He would start with the first pose in the top left and proceed one pose at a time to the last pose in the bottom right. Quote, the second is called pose to pose. Here the animator plans his action, figures out just which drawings will be needed to animate the business, makes the drawings relating them to each other in size and action, and gives the scene to his assistant to draw the in-betweens. End quote. In this example of a walk cycle, the animator would draw only the main poses. He would start with the first pose in the top left and proceed to the middle pose, and then the last pose in the bottom right. After these main poses are done, the assistant would then draw the in-betweens. The fifth principle is follow-through or overlapping action. Quote, when a character entering a scene reached the spot for his next action, he often came to a suddenly and complete stop. This was stiff and did not look natural. Several different ways were eventually found to correct these conditions. They were called either follow-through or overlapping action, and no one really knew where one ended and the other began. End quote. In this example of a ball with a tail, we can see the idea of follow-through. In the last two poses, we see that the ball has come to a stop. However, notice that the tail is still in motion in the very last frame. This is the idea of follow-through, because the primary action, the ball bounce, has stopped, but the follow-through action, the tail, continues to move. The sixth principle is slow in and slow out. Quote, by putting the in-betweens close to each extreme and only one fleeting drawing halfway between, the animator achieved a very spirited result, with the character zipping from one attitude to the next. This was called slow in and slow out, since that is the way the in-betweens were timed. End quote. If an animation lacks the slow in and slow out principle, it looks very mechanical. We see in the example that the beginning and end of the animation contain more frames that are close together, which means a slower pace. The center of the example has fewer frames that are spaced apart, which means a faster pace. The seventh principle is arcs. Quote, very few living organisms are capable of moves that have a mechanical in and out or up and down in precision. The movements of most living creatures will follow a slightly circular path. Most movements will describe an arc of some kind. End quote. We can see this principle in action with the example of the pendulum. As the pendulum swings back and forth, the frames are composed of an arc. The eighth principle is secondary action. Quote, often the one idea being put over in a scene can be fortified by subsidiary actions within the body. When this extra business supports the main action, it is called a secondary action and is always kept subordinate to the primary action. End quote. We can see this principle of secondary action in Pixar's Jerry's Game. The man is playing a game of chess. When he moves his chess piece and then wins the game, the primary action is knocking the opposing chess piece down. The secondary action is the smile he presents when he wins. The ninth principle is timing. Quote, the number of drawings used in any move determines the amount of time that action will take on the screen. Over time, the personalities that we're developing were defined more by their movements than their appearance, and the varying speed of these movements determined whether the character was lethargic, excited, nervous, relaxed. Neither acting nor attitude could be portrayed without paying very close attention to timing. End quote. Essentially, the more frames and more tightly packed together they are, the slower the animation. If we go back to the pendulum and we use the standard 24 frames per second, we can make the pendulum swing slower by adding more in-betweens and placing them closer together, as seen in frames 1 through 3 and 7 through 9. We can also make the pendulum swing faster by adding fewer in-betweens and spacing them apart, as seen in frames 4 through 6. An important principle to know in animation when it comes to timing is called drawing on and then a number. What is meant by this is that drawing on ones means that in a 24 frames per second animation, there's one drawing on each frame, that is 24 frames. If one would draw on twos, then there are only 12 frames, that is one drawing every 2 frames. The 10th principle is exaggeration. Quote, Walt Disney believed in going to the heart of anything and developing the essence of what he found. If a character was to be sad, make him sadder. Bright, make him brighter. worried, more worried, wild, make him wilder, end quote. Exaggeration is probably the most used principle in animation. This is especially true in the traditional animations such as Tom and Jerry, as seen in this example. Exaggeration emphasized the emotions and the actions of the animated character and brought the character to a fuller life. The 11th principle is solid drawing. Quote, "You should learn to draw as well as possible before starting to animate," Grim Natwick pointed out. "The better you can draw, the easier it'll be for you. You'll have to draw the character in all positions and from every angle. And if you can't do it and have to stage it from some other angle, it's very restrictive and takes longer." Signs were hung on many walls where the young trainees would be sure to see them, and the one we remember best was, "Does your drawing have weight, depth, and balance?" A casual reminder of the basics of solid three-dimensional drawing, end quote. If we use a simple sphere for our character, we can show this principle easily. If we draw straight lines on the sphere, we make it look flat and more like a circle. However, if we use curved lines instead, we make the sphere look like a ball with substance and weight. Twinning is an issue that many animators face. Twinning means that the arms and legs of a character are parallel and performing the same action. Most of the time, animators are unaware that this is even happening. This can be fixed by shifting the character's weight, for example, and then putting one hand on the hip. The 12th principle is appeal. Quote, "Appeal was very important from the start. The word is often misinterpreted to suggest cuddly bunnies or soft kittens. To us, it meant anything that a person likes to see, a quality of charm, pleasing design, simplicity, communication, and magnetism. Your eye is drawn to the figure that has appeal, and once there, it is held while you appreciate what you are seeing." End quote. Simply put, appeal is visual interest. Using a variety of shapes helps to set up an appealing character. If all the characters in a scene are using the same shapes, they become less appealing to the eye. The same principle goes for the proportions of the characters. The more varied the proportions of the characters, the more appealing they will be. It is also very important to keep the drawing simple. Remember, you will need to be drawing or moving the character hundreds if not thousands of times, so you need it to be as simple as possible. If you're interested in learning more about 3D art and animation, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.